Hey, are you thinking the V8 engine is dead? Gone? Sayonara? Later, buddy? Yeah, that's not really accurate. According to the latest 2020 CAFE requirements, things have changed quite a bit since 2012, and it's going to benefit you. You're going to want to stick around this video. I'm going to explain everything. I'm going to lay it all out for you. It's going to be like a PowerPoint from college or high school or where the hell you went to. Maybe your job today had a PowerPoint. It's going to be like that. It's going to be a little drab at times, but trust me, it's really interesting information. I hope you stick around and watch it. And oh, by the way, my name is Tim. This is Pickup Truck Plus SUV Talk. On this channel, you find truck and SUV news, reviews, interesting stories like this one. Hit subscribe, click the bell, and smash the like button. We're talking trucks and V8 engines. Yeah, V8 engines. V8 engines. Good stuff. Yeah. So if you didn't know, a couple of weeks ago, the 2020 CAFE rules were put into effect. Now, there's a lot of political noise about these rules and whether Trump rolled back this and what Obama did and all this kind of stuff. I'm going to cut that garbage out because it's really, well, it's just a lot of noise. Let's get down to the basics of this CAFE and what it deals with powertrains, what it's going to deal with engine technology. I'm going to share with you 4 basic engine technologies. We'll put it on the screen, kind of walk through them. And we'll talk about these advanced powertrains as well and what the Trump's EPA and NHTSA working together, what they think about projections for the future powertrains, and it's pretty eye-opening what they think about electric vehicles, fuel cell vehicles, and also the good old V8 engine. Let's dig into this. So the information I'm going to present to you today is from the Safer, Affordable, Fuel-Efficient Vehicles. This was the new CAFE rules that were passed on April 11th of 2020, I believe was the date. And this covers 2021 to 2026 model years, just another revision of these rules. And so there's a lot of interesting things from these rules and a lot of controversy. So heck yeah, let's talk about it. Very controversial. But let me first show you what I've been reading for the last couple days, because it's good stuff. So here it is. If you thought that government speak was kind of just crazy, well, here you go. This is 1,975 pages of government speak about engines and the pathways to new engines, and holy cow, the preamble is like 500 pages. So I'm going to try to break this down. I may have to do multiple videos to get everything out to you, but let's start with the PowerPoint I created because that's the best way to show it. Okay, let's start. There's basically 4 basic engine technologies that they're looking at. These are like the standard engine technologies, and when they say basic, all they're talking about is technologies that don't have to change the block. They don't change a lot of the structure of the engine. These are just things you can add to the engine to make it more fuel efficient. Okay, the first one, this is probably no surprise to anybody who's been around engines or cars for any that matter for the last couple decades, is variable valve timing. This, according to the EPA and to the CAFE rules, it dynamically adjusts the timing of the intake valves, exhaust valves, or both in relation to piston position. Variable valve timing can reduce pumping losses, provide increased engine torque and horsepower over a broad operation range. It's been nearly universal, used in model year 2017 fleets and newer. So basically, everybody's using this one already. The second one is variable valve lift. Now this adjusts the distance a valve travels from the valve seat, optimizing airflow over a broad range of engine operating conditions. So this can increase effectiveness by reducing pumping losses. Again, really working on pumping losses and making the engines more efficient use of gasoline. It may also improve the efficiency by affecting in-cylinder fuel and air mixture, motion, and combustion. This is less common than variable valve timing. Some OEMs use a limited, discrete approach to VVL, where 2 valve lift profiles are available versus a full range continuously variable implementation. So not as common, but it's something that they're using to adjust the lift and the timing to make the engines more efficient. The next one's going to be a little controversial, but hey, let's go. And the third one that's probably going to get a lot of comments below is direct injected. Yes, direct injected engines. This, what it does is it sprays fuel at high pressure directly in the combustion chamber. Now this provides cooling of the in-cylinder charge via in-cylinder fuel evaporation. It improves spark knock tolerance and enables an increased combustion ratio and a more optimal spark timing for improved efficiency. Now this appeared in about half of the engines they looked at, base engines model year 2017. And I think today is probably still about half or maybe a little more than half. There's port injection as well as regular direct injection to kind of remove and reduce the buildup of carbon buildup in the engine. That's a byproduct of direct injection. But I know a lot of people still have some feelings about direct injection. Basic cylinder deactivation. Yes, this is the basics. And the fourth one is basic cylinder deactivation. Yep,
This is the one that will get some more controversy as well. This disables the intake and exhaust valves and turns off fuel injection for the deactivated cylinders during light load operations. So basically, if you're driving down the highway with the V8, it'll turn into a 4-cylinder, and it turns off sending fuel to those cylinders. So that way, you're not wasting fuel. Now, manufacturers have used it on V6, V8, V10s, and V12s, and overhead valve engines, single overhead cam engines, and dual overhead cam engines. That's from model year 2017. Now, what's interesting in this report, they do say that in some engine configurations, in some operating conditions, there is additional noise, vibration, harshness challenges, so it's louder, which is interesting to me that it would be louder if you're not sending fuel through and causing combustion. But okay. NVH is pretty significant challenges are for the V6 and 4-cylinder. Limit the operating range where the cylinder deactivation can actually operate. For 4-cylinder inline engine configuration and smaller displacements, there are fewer operating conditions where engine load is low enough to use the cylinder deactivation, which limits effectiveness. So with that said, there's no manufacturers produced a inline 4-cylinder, and typically the smaller the engine placement, the less opportunity for cylinder deactivation. That makes sense, right? So if you have a bigger engine, you turn off more valves, you have more opportunity for fuel to be saved. If you go really tiny, you can't turn them off as often, and so there's not big bang for the buck. Those are the 4 basic ones, and then there's some more information that the EPA had in that document. Imagine that, 1,975 pages of information. They have a listing of various engine types, which I thought was kind of interesting. They have an overhead valve engine, single overhead cam engine, and for their projections, the overhead valve engine will turn into single overhead cam. It kind of maps together, so that way that technology is kind of going away. It's all going to be single overhead cab, or it's going to be dual overhead cam engines moving forward. The turbocharged downside engines, we know these from EcoBoost. Non-hybrid EV Atkinson mode engines. In the truck world, this is the Tacoma, has the Atkinson cycle. There's an auto cycle and an Atkinson cycle. It changes the way when you open and close the valves. And I can do more of this breaking down each one of these, but I thought I'd just put them all out there for once. There's a hybrid EV Atkinson cycle engine. So this is a Lexus has these, I believe, and Toyota has these as well, and they're hybrid engines. Mazda does some of this stuff as well. Advanced cylinder deactivation technologies. This is like the new, what I'm anticipating is the new GMC and Chevy Silverado with their dynamic fuel management systems. We have the Miller cycle engines and e-boost engines with 48 valve battery systems. And let me explain that for just a second. So about that Miller cycle engine, it's interesting. It's the first time I've heard of it. Maybe I missed out somewhere in some press conference or something, but it's the standard 4-cylinder stroke engines, according to howstuffworks.com, was called auto cycle engines. And this is where we talked about the Atkinson cycle, just a little different way to cycle it. The name there from Nicholas Otto, engine 1867. Ralph Miller patented his Miller cycle engine in 1940s, and for the last several years, Mazda's been using this type of engine in some of his cars. That's why I don't know it's about cars. A Miller cycle engine is very similar to an auto cycle engine. The Miller cycle uses pistons, valves, spark plugs, etc. There are 2 big differences. A Miller cycle engine depends on a supercharger, and a Miller cycle engine leaves the intake valve open during part of the compression stroke of the piston, so that the engine is compressing against the pressure of the supercharger rather than the pressure of the cylinder walls. The effect is increased efficiency at a level of about 15%. So that is what a Miller cycle engine is. Okay, then we have the variable compression ratio engines, and these are a little bit new, and then we have diesel engines, of course, and so that's their various engine types. Okay, let's talk about how we get there to all this advanced engine technology. So this is a basic engine path that the EPA has put out under the CAFE rules, and it talks about kind of the different levels and how we get these different levels. On the left-hand side is pretty important. So you have dual overhead cam, you have single overhead cam, and you have overhead valve engines. And the overhead valve engine maps to the single overhead cam. It's kind of they say it's kind of the similar path they would go on. So everything's got VVT as we discussed. I mean, the entire marketplace has got that. And then technology is applied in any order. And right now, most automakers have 2 of the 4 that's about the average, 2 of the 4 technologies. And as you'll see in a second, they're all going to end up with all these technologies. That kind of gives you an idea of how they see the future. This is how they figured out the CAFE numbers moving forward, how they figured out the fuel economy numbers on projections based on how they can improve the engine performance by mapping these future engine technologies out. So here you go. Here's a good example of this. So this is a basic engine path, variable valve tech to the VVL, direct injection or cylinder deactivation. If you go down below, you can see engine 01. This is engine reference peak power. That it's a unique way to measure power output. It's by I forget the name of the company, but it's a unique way to put out the power output. So just as you can see, as you go down, as you get to engine 02, as you get engine 03 and 04, you can keep adding these additional technologies, and that's where they're saying that eventually every engine will have all these technologies in it, and that's how we're going to see our fuel economy improvement through 2026 model year. So here's another chart that's kind of interesting as well. This shows the average OEM's CAFE and CO2 estimated final requirements for light trucks. You can see we're 2017, 2018, 2019. It's about a 1.5% increase each year. Our automakers say they can get more out of that with doing these future technologies like adding direct injection with cylinder deactivation, that kind of stuff going on. But that's kind of where they're at. That's where the aim is. So by 2026, light trucks on average will get 34 miles per gallon throughout the entire CAFE. So you're going to have some that are going to do better than that, and some do worse than that. Now, light trucks also include some SUVs as well. Now, this is always an interesting thing to bring up, and people don't always get this, but this is why it makes a huge difference. This is why there's so many crew cab trucks out there and longer bed trucks and things like that, because it's based on, your CAFE numbers are based on footprint, and that's from wheelbase to wheelbase, how big the vehicle is. The bigger the vehicle is, you can see on the right, the less fuel economy it needs based on the left. So that's where I've talked in other videos that if you did a regular cab short box, you can see that's all the way to the left. You have to get some really good fuel economy out of that because the footprint's so small. But if you did a crew cab with a 8-foot box, boy, you go all the way to the right, you can see the fuel economy can even drop off even more. So you can see there's incremental increases in footprint and as far as better fuel economy. But this is a great chart to show you exactly why there's been so many changes in the automotive marketplace, especially light trucks. And while you guys say, well, automakers don't offer regular cabs. Well, based on these numbers, I mean, they don't want to, because that regular cab with a regular bed really requires them a lot of effort to get to that price, to get to that fuel economy, I should say. Again, this is why you also see some better incentives on double cabs and crew cabs versus regular cabs, because they don't have to pay a penalty to the EPA, or that doesn't go against their fuel economy targets, their emissions targets, by selling that larger vehicle. And this other chart is really interesting as well, and it's a little blurry. I'm sorry about that. I can't really recreate it just the way it's done, but what this is showing what the EPA and it's kind of came to the automakers. They kind of looked at what the effectiveness of the different technologies they want to offer in these engines is. So, if you kind of go left to right, variable valve lifting, slight improvement. Direct injection, slight improvement. Cylinder deactivation, some slight improvement. You're all 5% kind of range there. And then advanced cylinder deactivation with more ways to turn off different cylinders. Boy, that's a big improvement they're thinking. Then you turbocharge it. Boom, boom. Big improvements in turbocharging. You add higher compression engines. Bam, there's bigger improvements. And then advanced diesel, which, again, I need to do a little more research on exactly what that is. But that's the big improvements there. So you can see where if you improve the diesel, you get a bunch more fuel economy out of it. And that's always been the case with diesels. But it kind of really is interesting to see that even though they're pushing for all these variable valve lifting and direct injection and cylinder deactivation to be included in all these engines, we're really only talking about 5, maybe 10, maybe. I guess if you add them all together, you get 15% there, maybe, if you look at the medians, not just the first and third quartile of improvements, or percentile, I should say. And so, I mean, you got to really say that, yeah, you're going to see incremental improvements in fuel economy for your trucks by just slight improvements. Like all of a sudden this engine's going to have direct injection now, and where it used to not have that at all. And that's what you're going to see the change happening, because it's just going to, that little bit improvement are going to add up over the long range against the total CAFE numbers they need to meet. And then this is interesting as well. Sometimes it doesn't work. So, you're talking about adding cylinder deactivation and direct injection, all this kind of stuff. And Toyota brought an interesting comment. This was actually in the CAFE rules, and I thought it was such a good example of something that I thought would really bring it out. So they talked about a 2018 Toyota Camry. They had an exemplar vehicle, I guess, was a vehicle they were showing off with cylinder deactivation. Now, if you know Toyota, they've been really big on their Atkinson cycle. The Atkinson cycle engine, that's what's in the Tacoma has it. I guess the Camry has it as well. And so while they admit that the adding cylinder deactivation to Atkinson cycle engines is technically possible and would provide some fuel economy benefits, the primary function of cylinder deactivation is to reduce engine pumping losses, which the Atkinson cycle and EGR already accomplish. So you're kind of doubling up on technology there. Diminishing return on the cylinder deactivation, Atkinson cycle and EGR are further exaggerated by smaller four-cylinder engines. So I thought it was really interesting that if you go down the Atkinson cycle way like Toyota's done, you can't offer cylinder deactivation without really having much improvement. And then if you go with smaller displacement, which they're doing, smaller engines, well, you're really going to run into some problems. So I think that there's a future for all this technology working together, but you're going to see some companies going to use it, some are not going to use it based on whether or not it works with their existing technology. So this is interesting. This is the CAFE model engine phase-in, and this is when things are going to happen, and the phase-in cap. Now, the phase-in cap means that's how much of a percentage that they're allowing this to weigh on their long-term numbers, and we'll get to that in a minute. So what their fuel economy targets are, they're allowing this number to weigh in at that amount. So whatever number they figure it's going to be, it's like for example, with improved engine friction reduction, they figure that's going to be 20% of the phase-in cap that'll started in 2017. And so it's not going to be a big thing right off the bat, but it's going to keep growing. If you remember the interview we did, I don't know, a couple weeks ago about oil, where they're working on new oils that have less friction, and they're lighter weight oils that improves fuel economy, there it is right there. And the EPA is not expecting a whole lot of EPA inlets of these CAFE rules, a whole lot of cap. But if you go down to variable valve timing, you can see it's basic engine. These are basic engine improvements. They're already done, going back 2004, 2000. When you get into turbocharged, you can see that 2004 was, I think, the first kind of years it came out. And then 2010 was the next generation of like EcoBoost, and so you can see the changes there. You have cooled exhaust gas recirculation. Now that was turbocharged engine, 2010. That you're trying to cool down those turbos to make it more efficient. Advanced cylinder deactivation. Now this is the new thing, came out in 2019. That's why it leads me to believe they're talking about GMC and Chevy in here. They don't always point out the manufacturers in the CAFE rules, but 34%, that's how much they figure that's going to weigh on the phasing cap. And you got to imagine as years go on, they're going to expect that number to rise in future CAFE rules. High compression ratio engines. Now it's 2010 and 2017. And they have future one 2017. They think really highly of these high compression ratio engines. Variable compression ratio engine. This is a new one, and I'll explain. It has 20% of the phase-in cap. Variable turbo geometry, which is interesting. This is 34%, 20%. This is just different ideas, and I'll explain those ideas in the VTG engine. You have the turbocharging and downsizing with cylinder deactivation. Now this is the advanced turbo engine. So this, what they're saying here is with the technology pathway, this is a future engine powertrain that the engine would be redone completely. So it's not the basic engine. You're not taking a basic engine and you're just adding this stuff to it. You are doing more to this. So imagine a next generation EcoBoost with cylinder deactivation. That's what they're saying. They're moving forward. And so looking at this numbers, you have 20%, and it started in phase in 2016, so there's some options out there, but I'm just looking at like a big name for that, like what Ford would be. And then you have turbocharged and downsizing with advanced cylinder deactivation, and that's 34%. That's going to starting in 2020 is the phase in year for that. So, that's what's coming. If you want to know about future technology and what's coming in engines, turbocharged and downsizing with advanced cylinder deactivation. So, you're going to take a V6 and make it into like a 4 or 3 cylinder at some point. You have advanced diesel. This was in 2010. This is diesel engine improvements, 2010. This is kind of the changes for the DEF and the systems going on. And then you have in the bottom line, which is pretty interesting, diesel engine improvements with advanced cylinder deactivation. So that's 34% of the phase-in cap starting in 2023. So if you're not a fan of advanced cylinder deactivation, well, sorry, because that's the future. So I thought this chart was rather interesting. This was a chart, the final CAFE model engine technologies application schedule. And basically what they're saying is that all that stuff I just talked about is only going to be done when the engine block is redesigned. There it is. And so it's pretty clear that they're saying there's going to be a lot of changes coming forward, but it's only done when the engine's redesigned. Okay, let's talk about what has changed since 2012 and what the 2020 study says is the reasons why their numbers are different. So looking back, And the biggest thing that was changed is this fuel savings. So the prior rule saw fuel prices grow on assumed growth in fuel economy. So it is basically assumed that customers were going to buy the most fuel efficient vehicle they could, and automakers were going to build the most fuel efficient vehicles they could. That's the market was going to go that way, and that's how things were going to be. They didn't take into account people's desire for more torque or horsepower or different styling, and they certainly did not see the growth in trucks and SUVs. Technology costs. It didn't take into account the fact that hybrids and plug-in EV vehicles and hydrogen fuel cells were going to be really more expensive to purchase. And that purchase price meant that with the lower fuel prices, that the fuel savings is now beyond the first 30 months of vehicle ownership. That's resulted in less demand for that kind of stuff. And so you're seeing that kind of play out in the marketplace where these really expensive hybrids are only like 10, 20% of that automaker's take rate or what they sell in a certain model. They're just not as big sellers. And EV vehicles have hit a wall for years. They just really haven't grown. And we'll get more to that EV vehicles discussion in just a second. Another thing that's changed is the social cost of carbon emissions. This is rather interesting and definitely goes with the president's viewpoint on the world. It says, while the 2012 rule looked at the global impact of carbon emissions, the 2020 rule looks only at the U.S. and U.S. territories. So it does not take into account that emissions would spread across the oceans, basically. If you recalculate the rule based on this perspective, the benefits would have been 11 billion in savings rather than 53 billion in savings. And so they feel like they're not emitting as much carbon into the world as the prior rule said, and they don't need as high standards, and they'll still meet what the standards should have been back in 2012. The last thing they're saying is automakers couldn't keep up. And if you look at when the 2012 standards were set, nearly all automakers were set at or above the CAFE limit. As rules tightened, as things happen, every year, even with these standards, the 2020 standards are supposed to increase 1.5% of the fuel economy is supposed to grow each year. That basically automakers didn't keep up because people weren't buying the EVs and hybrids at the rate the rules foresaw. And you can see when it started in 2011, the number of fleets in the shortfall, and you see the number of fleets now in the shortfall going on versus the surplus. And so you can see some dramatic changes there, that fleets that had a surplus of like carbon emissions credit or CAFE credits, which is where you get additional credits if you sell EV vehicles and you'll be able to offset the bigger vehicles you sell, has dramatically dropped over the years. And the number of fleets that have a shortfall, they don't have enough credits, they're paying fines, has dramatically increased. And so that's where they said they had this issue where these rules were negatively impacting automakers, and it wasn't, fair as they saw it. And then the last part was the EVs were overvalued. And there was a really interesting statement in the CAFE that really spelled this out. They said, therefore, at present, EVs hold potential in offering significant time savings, but only to owners with driving patterns optimally suited for EV characteristics. If fast charging technologies emerge and a widespread network of fast charging stations is established, it is expected that a larger segment of EV vehicle owners will fully realize the potential of refueling time savings benefits EVs offer. This is an area of significant uncertainty, which means that the EPA and NHTSA both came together with these CAFE rules and said, we don't believe EVs are going to grow as much as people say, that this is our future product. And so they were able to work on the rules with that thought in mind to reduce the fuel economy targets based on the fact they don't see the EVs taking off as much as, like I said, the 2012 rules were optimistic about. Now, I wanted to point out the high compression ratio engines we talked about earlier in this presentation. Talk about the Atkinson cycle gasoline engines uses changes in valve timing to reduce the effective compression ratio while maintaining the expansion ratio. So reduction in top dead center clearance ratios, and they're allowed to do more higher compression with less knock. So yeah, they mitigated knock concerns by lowering back pressure and longer intricate exhaust systems, but these systems must balance knock performance. And so there's some stuff going on with the Atkinson cycle. That's what looking at the high compression ratio engines. Okay, so what does all this mean? What's the bottom line? Well, the fact sheet that the EPA and NHTSA put out says that the overall impact is going to be a reduced cost of $1,400 per new vehicle. So the idea is if they're going to roll back the standards a little bit and slow down all these new technologies coming out, like hybrids and things we talked about in this video, you're only going to have $1,400 less per vehicle. That's, in their view, going to result in 2.7 million more vehicles sold. I'm not sure about that, but okay. So you're going to make them cheaper, more people are going to buy them. That's their philosophy. Now, projected safety impact. So if you have more people driving newer cars, and newer cars are safer than older cars, trust me, they are. You're going to have less injuries over lifetime new vehicles through model year 2029, and you have fewer crash fatalities. And they're talking about like the advanced braking systems and the different crash avoidance systems in newer vehicles are going to save lives. So they're going to reduce the cost, sell more vehicles, have more people do in jobs because more vehicles are going to sell, and they'll be safer. And then they're also going to be cleaner too. They make the argument in the Safer Act that the 2012 Obama standards were unfeasible for reaching the Clean Air Act standards. So they said the numbers they came up with were just pipe dream on getting that number to work. So they're looking at newer vehicle standards will be subject to Clean Air Act. It's going to the higher pollution standards that those retired by this rule. So they're saying their new standards are more environmentally friendly than the prior standards, and the average fuel economy 40.4 mile per gallon by model year 2026. Now this looks at across the industry, so that's cars and EVs and trucks altogether. Okay, what does this really mean? I know I gave you the EPA and NHTSA's final assessment background from CAFE and the broken down numbers, but that's just government speak. So what does it really mean to consumers? Are we going to pay less per vehicle and buy a lot more vehicles? It's $1,000. It's not that big of a deal. But I think what's important here to understand is that the drive for innovation for better fuel economy targets that were set back in 2012 is diminished a little bit here. Those targets aren't as high as they were, and this really takes into account what consumers are buying. This EPA, NHTSA has really done a good job looking at consumers as far as spending and saying, you know what, consumers aren't really buying EV vehicles. They're really buying full-size trucks and SUVs. And that V8 engine is still a very popular fuel train choice among consumers. They're still choosing that as their powertrain because they still want to tow, and they want that big V8 engine. So we should make numbers that reflect that. And I think that's what happened in this case. And so I think from the standpoint for consumers, I think consumers win on this. You know, the V8 engine's not going away, no matter what you're hearing in the media. I think this CAFE rules really reinforce that it's not going away. There's no incentive now for automakers to really get rid of that. As you're looking at the numbers, if I just take my existing engine and I add cylinder deactivation, if I add variable valve lifts, if I add direct injection, I can hit the targets. Pretty simple. And then I keep my existing V8 engine. So that, I think, is the biggest takeaway, is that the world that was advancing so fast with hybrids and turbocharged engines and all this kind of stuff going on is not going to slow down a little bit. I think we'll see this incrementally moving forward. It's not going to happen overnight. Those powertrains decisions have been made years before, and so it's going to take a little while for them to hit the marketplace and we can do some things. But you're going to see that changing as we move forward. And I think that's the important thing for consumers, is to understand that your V8 engines, your big powertrains, your big engine, as far as towing and stuff like that, I don't think are going away at all. And I think this CAFE really reinforces that there's some uncertainty in the marketplace for electric vehicles and hybrids, and that really you're looking at a future with some V8 engines and things like that. So that's my biggest takeaway, is that I think people can take a breath, chill out a little bit, relax. Now, I do have some more videos on this because I think this is a very interesting topic, and I'm shocked that my colleagues aren't doing more with this, because this is the future. CAFE drives the industry on changes, and this makes a big impact moving forward. So I'm going to keep putting some videos out. Hopefully you watch them. They're a lot of work. I had to do a lot of drinking to understand what they're saying in these papers, but I hope you enjoy them. Make sure you check out this video over here because it's pretty interesting as well. Thanks for being a part of the channel. As always, find us on pickuptrucktalk.com. I'll put it down below. Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Find us over there. Thanks for watching. I'll see you down the road.